Robinson and what the White House is saying today. So, Emerald, a lot of pressure on the White House to get involved here, but what could they do?
From both sides. It's not just Republicans, but also Democrats who are upset with the lack of response from Biden. In fact, he hasn't said much about it since last week when he said that Israel has the right to defend itself. And then over the weekend, you know, he went to Delaware and he did briefly alluded to the situation in a video that he put out celebrating a Muslim holiday. Now, what we are learning today, there was some breaking news, John. We learned that the Biden administration approved a $730 million sale to Israel for some precision-guided weapons. Now, this is expected to increase the pressure from Democrats on their president, Joe Biden. Some of them have already been putting pressure on Biden. 28 Democrats, Senate Democrats, signing on to a statement calling for a ceasefire. Now, the sale was approved earlier in the month. Congress was officially notified on May 5th, John. That means that essentially Congress has 20 days to file some kind of non-binding resolution to try to get the president to veto the sale. So we'll be watching to see how he responds to that. But look, the White House is also in defense mode regarding $100 million in humanitarian aid that it has sent to Palestinians, which critics say is used for weapons and attacks on Israel.
On April 7th, the State Department announced that it unlocked $75 million in economic assistance to the West Bank and Gaza. Is that being reviewed in light of the rocket attacks coming from Gaza to Israel?
No, that was humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people. Again, Hamas is a terrorist organization. The Palestinian people are also suffering as a result of the actions of this terrorist organization and the steps that the rockets that they have launched into Israel. So, no, the humanitarian assistance will, of course, continue.
As expected, former Trump officials are laying the blame solely at President Biden and his policies for what we're seeing in Israel. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo taking to Twitter to criticize the Biden administration, which he says has distanced itself from Israel by attempting to revive the failed Iran deal. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki is getting ready to brief any minute now, so we expect, you know, a little more response out of the administration today via that briefing, John.
All right, everyone, keep us posted. Let us know what happens. Thanks so much. Yeah. All right, let's also get another update on this and welcome in now former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. Ambassador Oren, great to have you with us.
Good evening from Israel.
So how are you doing? How are things there right now?
We're hanging in there. You know, it's not the first time we've been through a war of this nature. I think our army is doing a very good job at ferreting out the terrorists, getting them in their tunnels, in their warrens. We call it the metro. It's hundreds of kilometers of underground bunkers and tunnels, under civilian areas, under hospitals, under schools. So it's difficult. And we're doing our best to hold down collateral damage, civilian casualties. It's very, very difficult when you're fighting an enemy shooting at you. Now they've fired well over 2,000 rockets at us, shooting at us while hiding behind their own population and using them as human shields.
I'm looking at a report here from the Jerusalem Post, and they are citing Palestinians who are concerned that Iran is trying to foil any ceasefire talks. They say the commander of the Quds Force, the Revolutionary Guard, they vowed their support for Hamas. And this is what you'd expect because Iran does not want to see peace here. They benefit by having this conflict escalate, right?
The Iranians are willing to fight Israel to the last Palestinian. Make no mistake about that. By dragging Israel into ground wars in Gaza, they deplete us. They get us isolated. They get us delegitimized. It costs us a lot of money. And they divert attention from what the Iranians are trying to do in Syria, to convert Syria into a forward base against Israel, to divert attention from Israel's efforts to prevent a renewal of the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. So, you know, it's certainly Hamas gets most of its money from Iran. Islamic Jihad is totally owned and operated by Iran. And about 90% of the rockets they're firing at us are made in Iran and smuggled into the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, and given the dominance of Hamas in the region, though, all these organizations might have some rivalries here and there, but they all kind of look to Iran for guidance. That's what's really driving this, correct?
It's one of the many things that's driving it. Hamas wants to take over the West Bank and wants to take over the Palestinian Authority. It's got a long list of goals that it wants to fulfill. But you got to ask yourself, how do you square a policy of renewing the Iran nuclear deal
right.
At the time when Iran is fomenting large-scale unrest and violence in the Middle East. And with the Iran nuclear deal, Iran's not going to get $10 billion. It's going to get hundreds of billions of dollars. And they're not going to use it to build schools and hospitals. They're going to use it to put more rockets into Gaza and create more wars, to kill more civilians. The logic of this actually escapes me.
Well, they've learned this in the past that, when John Kerry the last time around or Tony Blinken this time around underneath Joe Biden, when they won a deal, the urgency of this conflict gives them the leverage, right?
Well, I don't know if it gives that.
But they think it gives them the leverage, I should say. A better way of clarifying that.
I don't think they need much leverage. I mean, my impression of this administration, and I know these people very well, and I have a very, very high opinion of them, but they seem to be very determined to renew the Iran nuclear deal at almost any cost. I don't think it's a matter of leverage. I think it's a matter of ideology at this point, and it's an ideology, the logic of which totally escapes me, because I guarantee you, and listen, read my lips, you renew that Iran nuclear deal, are putting the Middle East into an irreversible path toward regional war, period.
Well, I want to ask you quickly, too, about the way this bombing of the press building, as it's being called, has been portrayed in the international press, including here in the United States. The Associated Press was located in that building. They were saying they were lucky to survive. Prime Minister Netanyahu said that's not the case. They actually showed security information to the United States. But earlier today, the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, denied seeing that evidence. Here he is.
President Biden and other members of the administration have raised directly our concerns with our Israeli counterparts about the safety and security of journalists operating in Gaza. And we have stressed the need for their protection. Israel has a special responsibility to protect civilians in the course of its self-defense, and that most certainly includes journalists.
What is your take on how this particular targeted attack is being portrayed, not just by the Secretary of State there, by a lot of media outlets?
Let me first clarify this. I don't think Israel needs to be lectured about preserving and protecting civilian life. Every civilian killed in Gaza, and we regret every civilian death in Gaza, is killed because Hamas is using them as a human shield, period. And the blame does not belong here. Israel takes extraordinary measures to avoid conflicting civilian casualties. We're fighting in one of the most densely populated areas in the world against an enemy who's shooting rockets at 4 million Israelis and hiding behind its own population. Israel, from my mind, bears no responsibility there, zero. Now, about what happened in the press building, Israel has one of the biggest armies in the world, one of the strongest armies in the world. We're firing wantonly, indiscriminately, and we just wanted to cause damage. Believe me, we can cause a lot more damage. If there was a reason why, if this building was destroyed, there's probably a very compelling reason why the building was destroyed, because there was terrorist activity going on there. And from what my sources tell me is the journalists knew it was going on in the building, and they were given ample warning to clear out. I hope that Secretary of State Blinken gets the information he wants, but at the end of the day, I trust Israeli sources, and that we had to do what we had to do to defend our citizens, because that's what this country's about.
Ambassador Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., thank you for your time, sir. Stay safe.
Be well. Thank you.
All right, let's check in now with Florida congressional candidate and decorated combat veteran, DOD advisor, and Newsmax contributor Corey Mills, who's with us today as well. Corey, great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you. Coming live to you from UAE today, John.
Oh, wow. Okay. Corey is in the United Arab Emirates. So, Corey, give us what is it like there? We've talked a lot about the Abraham Accords seemingly falling apart here as a result of this. One way you can look at this is that when the Abraham Accords were signed, those countries saw Iran as a bigger threat to the Middle East than Israel. What is happening in the UAE today, and how are they looking at this?
Well, I can tell you right now, the UAE continues its, steadfast charge with the Abraham Accord, just like all those who had signed underneath the Trump administration. There's been continual investment, as well as for different opening of financial lines of credit. I believe there was about $10 billion that was recently put in from the UAE to Israel to look at different types of infrastructure trade, technology, et cetera. So again, everyone recognizes that what's happening right now between the Hamas and Israel has nothing to do with, a lack of transparency or a lack of effort by the Middle East, but it's really Iran recognizing that the Biden administration has failed the foreign policy to hold them accountable, and they feel emboldened to be able to go ahead and take action, knowing there is no consequence to that. This is something they could not do under the Trump administration, as Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force, as well as for others, found out very quickly.
When, you hear, I was just talking to Michael Lauren about this, targeted attack on the building there that apparently housed the Associated Press and elements of Hamas. The AP says they were lucky to get out of there. Obviously, maybe they knew something since they were able to leave. But the way this is portrayed, Corey, do you think Hamas is getting a pass almost in the press here in the United States?
Well, again, I think that the mainstream media has continued to get passes for many things, especially if it had to benefit with the Democratic Party. But no, we need to look at the facts here. The Iranian proxy militia, again, Iran being the largest state sponsor of terrorism, launched rockets not only from just Hamas, where they're launching it from very crowded alleys, where they know that if they target these actual rocket launching platforms, it's going to have collateral damage. But they're also launching from Syria, and they're actually launching from Lebanon. And again, Hamas acts in the same proxy militia, territory as the Houthis in Yemen, as Hezbollah in Lebanon, as well as for Hayat al-Shabi in Iraq. And again, what they're seeing right now is that with Anthony Blinken at the Secretary of State, with Joe Biden at the helm, they know that they get a free pass when it comes to Iran's proxy militia strikes. They know that they're looking at JCPOA. They know that they're always going to be about talk and not about action. And that's why they feel necessary to go ahead and launch these types of attacks. But again, Israel has a very difficult and challenging perspective. They have to go ahead and eliminate key terrorist targets and try and go ahead and limit the amount of collateral damage. But Hamas is utilizing people, schools, hospitals, and things like this to launch their actual, militia platforms from. And again, this is very difficult when you talk about from a military and tactics perspective, something that I know a lot about.
Right. And yeah, that's an important point there. And you look at some of the way that these strikes go down. Israel has been done some in a surgical fashion before. This one, we saw the video there on the screen. Corey, real quickly as we wrap up here, I want to talk about the Space Force commander, Matthew Lohmeyer, has been fired after he called out the military's new diversity and inclusion training. He made the remarks on a podcast saying the training is rooted in critical race theory and Marxism. And he says they won't have a voice anymore, folks like him, once this stuff actually goes into place. What's your reaction to this?
Well, I'll be 100% up front. I'm 100% behind him. I think that he's exactly right. I think that he's been wrongfully terminated and removed from his position. I think critical race theory has no place in the United States military. I served right next to guys who are from, Brooklyn, New York, from Cambodia, who relocated to Los Angeles, California, guys from Texas, guys from Florida. We never looked at things from a race perspective. We looked at what it meant to take home your brother one way or another. I was willing to die for any of my guys as quickly as they were willing to die for me. We didn't look at race. We didn't look at gender. We didn't look at ethnicity. We didn't think about what it was. We fought together. We bled together. We all looked at the ideas that we bleed red, white, and blue. And again, things like critical race theory only serves to basically create reverse racism. We start seeing where opportunities are created for those who are not Caucasian or not of a certain, non-white ethnicity or background. And that starts to create things, problems and division within the military. And again, the military needs to be unified and fight together. And you can't do that when you have dangerous rhetoric and you have divisiveness like critical race theory. Everywhere
we see it implemented, critical race theory just causes more division, Corey. We see that. By the way, Corey, what time is it there in the UAE?
It is about 8:30 p.m. right now. We're about 8 hours ahead of you.
All right. Well, stay safe, Corey. We'll see you soon. Have a safe trip.
Thanks, John.
All right. Coming up, the FBI admits that the 2017 attack on that GOP baseball practice was an act of domestic terrorism. So what changed? We're going to talk to former FBI agent Jonathan Gillum next.